Episode number 210 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Today I'm going to cover a topic that I see often in my practice, which is IVF. So I have a lot of people either trying to go naturally and trying to conceive naturally, or people who are considering IVF. And I will talk about pretty much the main reasons that I've seen people choose either or, and I'll discuss my thoughts about it. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist, here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So one of the biggest reasons people chose IVF in the beginning of when it came out was really to treat in cases of when women had blocked tubes, because there was no way that they would naturally conceive. Over time, technology's increased. They've come up with a lot of different methods to help people conceive or couples conceive that haven't done so naturally or had difficulties conceiving naturally. Or in certain cases where the sperm count is really low. And in some cases, they need to do something called ICSI, where they inject the sperm into the egg and have it fertilized that way. So the technology is amazing, no doubt. And it's actually really, we're lucky that we're able to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of it's out of pocket, and that's obviously a very big drawback. But knowing that this technology is available has helped a lot of couples. So I wanted to discuss today why people should have IVF, according to my experience and what I've seen. And also, at what point do you try naturally? At what point do you do IVF? Those are the questions that I think a lot of couples are facing. And I've seen a lot of couples that have been trying for many years, and they just decided, like, enough, I'm just going to try IVF. And then I've also seen couples that have been doing IVF and had failed cycles and eventually took a break and got pregnant naturally. And this is after some of the doctors said that there's really no way that they're going to get pregnant naturally based on the numbers, based on the labs, and based on the IVF results. So that just proves to me, because it's anecdotal. I mean, there's no specific study for this, but for me, just my experience in working with couples is that you are going to see cases where the natural way of getting pregnant, even though they went through a lot of trouble, the natural way ended up working better. And they were also told that there was no other way for them based on what the doctors could see. And that's the thing too. So just in general, with every medicine, doctors come up with certain ways to measure a person's status, really, like physical status, what they're able to help them with. So one of the ways they do that, because it's obviously limited, we can only measure what we are able to measure with technology and just ability to look into what levels of hormones there are in the blood, look at the ultrasounds and look at the ovaries and look at the uterus. I mean, there's many different ways to measure and diagnose couples, and they can measure sperm count, obviously. So based on that is basically what they have in order to make their conclusions. The thing is that sometimes those conclusions are not 100% accurate, because even with that, you still can't predict if a person is going to get pregnant naturally. And I say that because I've seen it time and time again of people about to do IVF and then getting pregnant right before, when they were waiting for their period to come so they can start their stims, their cycles. So I've seen it all different ways. And then I've also seen people have great results choosing IVF, and that ended up working out for them. So there's no right or wrong way to do this whole fertility journey. And that's really the point that I want to drive home the most in this episode, is that there is no one specific way. And another thing that I did notice, and I do notice sometimes with some patients, is people will rush to do IVF because they just think that that's the golden ticket. And there's this kind of misconception, I think, where, okay, we've tried for 6 months, I don't want to wait any longer. And I'm talking young couples, and they don't want to wait any longer. They just came to me, so they didn't even do acupuncture for very long. And they just want to, like, they think that, okay, I'm going to do IVF and that's going to be my solution. And that's not always necessarily the case. I think that it's important, if you have the time to spare and you're young, then try different means before you rush to IVF. It's very costly. It shouldn't be the first choice. And if you are starting to work with an acupuncturist or a nutritionist or a functional medicine doctor, like, give that some time, because it does take time and it does work. So number one, it's good to take time. Even if you do end up doing IVF, you're going to be much better off if you give yourself that time to really absorb the treatments and to also change, have the changes that you're implementing for your lifestyle to impact your body and your egg health. So give yourself some time to really absorb whatever it is that you're doing and rebalancing it. And also give it a chance, because it might work out naturally. So IVF, again, it's not the first choice. And the reason why is because it's very costly. Number one, it's really stressful. People have to go multiple times a week, sometimes to go to the doctor to make sure that they get the exact test. Sometimes the doctor or the office can be very, as I've heard this many times, very unorganized, and lab results get mixed up. I mean, people have had really difficult experiences because it's human error and it happens, but it's very frustrating because a lot of times they won't have the same nurse and they won't have the same staff. So it's really stressful on that end, because many of my patients have expressed to me that they actually have to work overtime to make sure that they're getting the right information, getting the medicine on time, and then also having to do the hormones. When people do the hormones, very rarely do people not have side effects. I've heard people feeling exhausted, retaining water, getting really bloated, having issues with their digestion, having issues with sleep, getting night sweats, really bad migraines, the list goes on, and being really emotional, feeling really emotional. And that's because hormones can really impact your state of mind. Hormones are like little programmers and software. So if you shift that, you shift that balance for whatever reason, it's not natural. Like, ultimately, it's going to make you feel a certain way. That being said, it's not the end of the world either, if it's obviously a limited time, but it's not something that's going to be easy to go through. So this is something that should not be the first choice, in my opinion. And this is just my opinion. You don't have to take my opinion. And I've had patients where they felt really called to doing it, and I always encourage that. If you feel called to doing anything, then that is your intuition speaking to you. And that's the key thing, is that not all roads are the same in the fertility journey. Every single person is so unique, and something that worked for your best friend may not be your path. And I've seen this all across the board. Yes, you can learn a lot from other people's experiences. Yes, you can read up a lot about other people's successes and why they were successful. And yes, there are certain general things that do apply to everybody. Like, obviously, if you sleep better, you're going to do better. Your hormones are going to be more balanced. If you eat healthy, if you exercise, everything in balance. Of course, those are things that all across the board are wonderful for everybody. But there are definitely other things that are very unique to every individual, and every individual responds differently. And some people respond really well to the IVF process and others do not. Others do not. They either overstimulate, they get really sensitive, or sometimes it just doesn't work with their body and they get failed cycles. And it's interesting because you would think, and I think this is really the conclusion that a lot of times doctors make, is you would think if you're kind of getting all of these things and manipulating them with your hands, able to fertilize and check and test, that would be the creme de la creme. And it could be. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that it could be in some cases, but in other cases, it does not work out. And that person actually does better naturally than through IVF. And it's surprising because you would think IVF would be like the best because you're paying the most. And I think that that's one of the misconceptions, because you're paying the most and you have this technology and wow, it's amazing. You know, you have all these different things and state-of-the-art labs and reputable doctors. It seems like that would be, you know, the gold standard. But it's just not. It's not for every single person. It's not for every couple. It's not always the right choice. And on top of that, I always suggest this and I repeat myself a lot, but in case you haven't listened to other podcasts where I've said this, I always suggest to speak to many doctors. You will have different vibes from different doctors. You want a doctor that believes in your success. And I stress this highly. Not just a doctor, an acupuncturist, a naturopath, like any person that is on your team. It's really important that they believe in your success. It's really important that they approach this knowing that they're going to do everything that they can and really seeing you pregnant. It makes a difference energetically. I'm telling you this. I'm not sure why. Well, probably it's an intention thing, which I believe in, but not everybody really understands that. But if you have somebody that says, well, it's kind of questioning and doesn't really believe, like the likelihood of you really succeeding is very low, you know, but if you really want me to, that kind of thing, definitely go and get another opinion. Try to find somebody who is really enthusiastic to work with you and can really see you succeeding. That is really important. It's really important to do that because ultimately, when you are in front of a doctor that is doubting your ability, whether you want to or not, you're going to feel that vibe and it's going to impact your own belief in your body. And I've seen this across the board. I've spoken to so many women about this. A lot of times they feel like a number. They don't really feel like they're being heard. They sometimes have to, it's like pulling teeth to just get the tests done that they want to get done and the doctor doesn't agree with. And to me, it's what's the big deal? It's a test. Just run it for the patient. Just like listen to them. Not all doctors do that, but a lot of them do, you know, so you have to find your right person that you connect with. And it's really important for your journey. I've seen it really make or break the whole process. I've seen people succeeding a lot more when they found the right doctor. And I've seen people trying naturally for a while after doing IVF, then trying naturally for a while. That doesn't work. And after that point, I actually sit with them and have a discussion and kind of re-examine what's next and what the options are, because obviously I would have liked to see them get pregnant earlier and I don't want them wasting their time. So that's when you start to say, okay, I've given the natural method all my best. I've tried naturally. I've done the diet. I've done everything. Then at that point, you can go back, get tested again, see if your numbers changed, which again, with the numbers, they're great information, but they're not the end all be all, because I've seen people with really poor numbers end up having 2 healthy kids after the poor numbers and after the poor diagnosis. So I've seen it enough times to tell you that it doesn't mean that people are not going to get pregnant. If their FSH is really high, if their AMH is really low, all of those things, if the TSH is a little off, if they get it under control with a thyroid medication, It's obviously not guaranteed, but it's doable. And I've seen that not really make a difference on the outcome. It just doesn't, because they wouldn't have 2 healthy kids after those numbers if it did. And I've seen that more than a couple of times, enough to say it shouldn't make you doubt your ability to conceive, but it should also make you realize that maybe there are things that you might want to implement to help improve your egg quality, to help improve your overall fertility. There's definitely things that you can do. And I discuss this a lot on the podcast, is just there's so many things that you can do and implement. And one of the biggest things that I think, and I keep stressing this, is really mindset. Visualizing it, believing in yourself, meditating, getting quiet, coming back to yourself, because it's so easy to lose yourself through this process, and it's so easy to believe 100% everything your doctor says. And I think it should be a collaboration between you, your intuition, your husband or wife, your family really, and your unit and the doctor. So having that whole collaboration as a team working together is the most ideal way to do this. And it feels less stressful, usually for patients that do feel comforted, heard, and are able to really get across what they want to say. And they feel like they have a hand in their process rather than just being kind of like a passenger in their own journey. So it is important to have a physician that cares and that you are able to communicate with successfully. So those are definitely the things that I would consider, but I don't want to generalize. But what I would say is, if you are starting out and it has been a certain amount of time and you're implementing new things that you haven't done before, I would give it about 3 to 6 months. And you're also at an age where you're able to afford it a little bit. I would give it 3 to 6 months of trying naturally. But I still suggest right away getting all the tests done, getting evaluated, maybe going to a reproductive endocrinologist, because they are more specialized than a gynecologist. The gynecologist, I've noticed, they know up to a certain point, but they're not specialized in fertility specifically. The reproductive endocrinologist will run the right tests. They'll look for everything. However, they are also very focused on ART, assisted reproductive technology. So whether it's IVF, IUI, maybe doing things like Clomid or letrozole, they're going to look for that because that is part of their toolbox. So just keep that in your mind and keep it with a grain of salt. Don't take it too seriously right off the bat unless you're ready to do it. So go get tested, get evaluated, and then perhaps find somebody to work with through natural means so that you know what to eat, you know what supplements to take, and possibly doing acupuncture. And also, one of the benefits to waiting is that you could do herbs. I don't give herbs once people do any kind of ART. So I will start out with herbs if they're not doing any kind of IUI, medicated IUI, IVF, or even Clomid or letrozole. That's when if they're not taking any of that, that's when I'll do herbs. And herbs can really make a difference. And they can benefit not just for naturally, but they can benefit also to prepare a woman who's about to go through fertility treatments. I mean, not right close to it, but a couple of months before would be ideal. And, those are the things that I would say. Now, if you are getting to a point where you are getting older, you are in a time crunch and you really want something immediately, that's when I would start considering looking into it. So those are my thoughts when it comes to IVF. I definitely think that it is worth a shot to try naturally if you can, if you're just starting out. And even if you're not starting out, but you're like maybe trying for over a year, and you want to try doing things like acupuncture or doing certain treatments, give that a chance. Give it a couple of months, because I personally have seen with my patients that it does make a difference. So give it a couple of months, give it its fair shot, because ultimately, at the end of it, you're going to be better off even if you were to do IVF. But at the same time, I would still reach out to a reproductive endocrinologist and get a couple of consultations. It really doesn't hurt to do that. And that is those are my thoughts. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you so much for tuning in. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.